Yay, we are alive. Let's do it again. Problem has been resolved. I just had to reboot because we had technical difficulties. Um, let's see. Let's do that. And now, let us begin. Shea Butter, Miss M. Yes, I had to reboot. We had technical difficulties. Yeah. So we're here, though. We're here now. All right, I shan't keep you because I know it's late. The Law and the Promise. Chapter 4. There is no fiction. The distinction between what is real and what is imaginary is not one that can be finally maintained. All existing things are, in an intelligible sense, imaginary. John S. Mackenzie. There is no fiction. If an imaginal activity can produce a physical effect, our physical world must be essentially imaginal. To prove this would require merely that we observe our imaginal activities and watch to see whether or not they produce corresponding external effects. If they do, then we must conclude that there is no fiction. Today's imaginal drama or fiction becomes tomorrow's fact. If we had this wider view of causation, that causation is mental, not physical, that our mental states are causative of physical effects, then we would realize our responsibility as a creator and imagine only the best imaginable. Fable enacted as a sort of stage play in the mind is what causes the physical facts of life. Man believes that reality resides in the solid objects he sees around him, that it is in this world that the drama of life originates, that events spring suddenly into existence, created moment by moment out of antecedent physical facts. But causation does not lie in the external world of facts. The drama of life originates in the imagination of man. The real act of becoming takes place within man's imagination and not without. The following stories could define causation as the assemblage of mental states, which occurring creates that which the assemblage implies. The foreword from Walter Lord's A Night to Remember illustrates my claim: imagining creates reality. In 1898, a struggling author named Morgan Robertson concocted a novel about a famous Atlantic liner, far larger than any that had ever been built. Robertson loaded his ship with rich and complacent people and then wrecked it one cold April night on an iceberg. This somehow showed the futility of everything, and in fact, the book was called Futility when it appeared that year, published by the firm of M.F. Mansfield. 14 years later, a British shipping company named the White Star Line built a steamer remarkably like the one in Robertson's novel. The new liner was 66,000 tons displacement. Robertson's was 70,000 tons. The real ship was 882.5 feet long. The fictional one was 800 feet. Both could carry about 3,000 people, and both had enough lifeboats for only a fraction of that number. But then, this didn't seem to matter because both were labeled unshakable. On April 19th, 1912, the real ship left Southampton on her maiden voyage to New York. Her cargo included a priceless copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam and a list of passengers collectively worth $250 million. On her way over, she too struck an iceberg and went down on a cold April night. Robertson called his ship the Titan. The White Star Line called its ship the Titanic. Had Morgan Robertson known that imagining creates reality, that today's fiction is tomorrow's fact, would he have written the novel Futility? In the moment of the tragic catastrophe, writes Schopenhauer, the conviction becomes more distinct to us than ever that life is a bad dream from which we have to awake. And the bad dream is caused by the imaginal activity of sleeping humanity. Imaginal activities may be remote from their manifestation, and unobserved events are only appearance. Causation, as seen in this tragedy, is elsewhere in space and time. Far off from the scene of action, invisible to all, was Robertson's imaginal activity, like a scientist in a control room directing his guided missile through space time. Who paints a picture, writes a play or book, which others read while he's asleep in bed? Oh, the other side of the world when they o'erlook. His page, the sleeper, might as well be dead. What knows he of his distant, unfelt life? What knows he of the thoughts his thoughts are raising, the life his life is giving, or the strife concerning him, some cavilling, some praising? Yet which is most alive? He who's asleep, or his quick spirit in some other place, or score of other places that doth keep attention fixed and sleep from others' chase? Which is he, the he that sleeps, or he that his own he can neither feel nor see? Samuel Butler. Imaginative writers communicate not their vision of the world, but their attitudes which result in their vision. Just a short while before Catherine Mansfield died, she said to her friend Orage, "There are in life as many aspects as attitudes toward it, and aspects change with attitudes. Could we change our attitude, we should not only see life differently, but life itself would come to be different. Life would undergo a change of appearance because we ourselves had undergone a change in attitude. Perception of a new pattern is what I call a creative attitude towards life." Prophets, wrote Blake, in the modern sense of the word, have never existed. Jonah was no prophet in the modern sense, for his prophecy of Nineveh failed. Every honest man is a prophet. He utters his opinion both of private and public matters. Thus, if you go on so, the result is so. He never says such a thing shall happen, let you do what you will. A prophet is a seer, not an arbitrary dictator. The function of the prophet is not to tell us what is inevitable, but to tell us what can be built up out of persistent imaginal activities. The future is determined by the imaginal activities of humanity, activities in their creative march, activities which can be seen in your dreams and the visions of your head as you lay in bed. Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, in the true sense of the word, like this dancer who now, from the summit of his realized ideal, sights yet higher peaks that are to be scaled. After you have read this story, you will understand why he is so confident that he can predetermine any materialistic future he desires, and why he is equally sure that others give reality to what were otherwise a mere figment of his imagination. That there exists and can exist nothing outside imagining on some level or another. Nothing continues in being save what imagining supports. The mind can make substance and people planets of its own with beings brighter than have been, and give a breath to forms which can outlive all flesh. As my story begins at the age of 19, I was a mildly successful dancing teacher and continued in this static state for almost 5 years. At the end of this time, I met a young lady who talked me into attending your lectures. My thought, upon hearing you say imagining creates reality, was that the entire idea was ridiculous. However, I decided to accept your challenge and disprove your thesis. I bought your book, Out of This World, and read it many times. Still unconvinced, I set myself a rather ambitious goal. My present position was as an instructor with the Arthur Murray Dance Studio, and my goal was to own a franchise and be boss of an Arthur Murray studio myself. This seemed the most unlikely thing in the world, as franchises were extremely difficult to secure. But on top of this fact, I was completely without the necessary funds to begin such an operation. Nevertheless, I assumed the feeling of my wish fulfilled as night after night in my imagination, I went to sleep managing my own studio. 3 weeks later, a friend called me from Reno, Nevada. He had the Murray studio there and said it was too much for him to cope with alone. He offered me a partnership, and I was delighted. Was so delighted, in fact, that I hastened to Reno on borrowed money and promptly forgot all about you and your story of imagination. My partner and I worked hard and were very successful. But after a year, I was still not satisfied. I wanted more. I began thinking of ways and means to get another studio. All my efforts failed. One night, as I retired, I was restless and decided to read. As I looked through my collection of books, I noticed your slender volume, Out of This World. I thought of the silly nonsense I had gone through 1 year before, getting my own studio. Wait, getting my own studio? The words in my mind electrified me. I reread the book that night, and later, in my imagination, I heard my superior praise the good job we had done in Reno and suggest we acquire a second studio, as he had a second location ready for us if we desired to expand. I reenacted this imaginal scene nightly without fail. 3 weeks from the first night of my imaginal drama, it materialized, almost word for word. My partner accepted the new studio in Bakersfield, and I had the Reno studio alone. Now I was convinced of the truth of your teaching, and never again will I forget. Now, I wanted to share this wonderful knowledge of imaginal power with my staff. I tried to tell them of the marvels they could accomplish. But I was unable to reach many, although one fantastic incident resulted from my efforts to tell this story. A young teacher told me he believed my story, but said it would have probably happened anyway in time. He insisted the entire theory was nonsense, but stated that if I could tell him something of an incredible nature that would actually happen and which he could witness, then he would believe. I accepted his challenge and conceived a truly fantastic test. The Reno studio is the most insignificant in the entire Murray system because of the small population count in the city itself. There are over 300 Murray studios in the country with much larger populations, therefore providing greater possibilities to draw from. So my test was this. I told the teacher that within the next 3 months, at the time of a national dance convention, the Little Reno studio would be the foremost topic of conversation at that convention. He calmly stated, this was quite impossible. That night, when I retired, I felt myself standing before a tremendous audience. I was speaking on creative imagining and felt the nervousness of being before such a vast audience. But I also felt the wonderful sensation of audience acceptance. I heard the roar of applause, and as I left the stage, I saw Mr. Murray himself come forward and shake my hand. I reenacted this entire drama night after night. It began to take on the tones of reality, and I knew I had done it again. My imaginal drama materialized down to the last detail. My little Reno studio was the talk of the convention, and I did appear on that stage just as I had done in my imagination. But even after this unbelievable but actual happening, the young teacher who threw me the challenge remained unconvinced. He said it had all happened too naturally, and he was sure it would have happened anyway. I did not mind his attitude, because his challenge had given me another opportunity to prove, at least to myself, that imagination does create reality. From that time on, I continued with my ambition to own the largest Arthur Murray dance studio in the world. Night after night in my imagination, I heard myself accepting a studio franchise for a great city. Within 3 weeks, Mr. Murray called me and offered a studio in a city of 1.5 million people. It is now my goal to make my studio the greatest and biggest in the entire system. And of course, I know it will be done through my imagination. EOL Jr. Imagining, writes Douglas Fawcett, may be hard to grasp, being quicksilver like. It vanishes into each of its metamorphoses and thereby displays its transformative magic. We must look beyond the physical fact for the imagining which has caused it. For 1 year, EOL Jr. lost himself in his metamorphosis, but fortunately, he remembered the silly nonsense he had gone through before getting his own studio and reread the book. Imaginal acts on the human level need a certain interval of time to develop, but imaginal acts, whether committed to print or locked in the bosom of a hermit, will realize themselves in time. Test yourself, if only out of curiosity. You will discover the profit is your own imagining, and you will know there is no fiction. We should never be certain that it was not some woman treading in the winepress who began that subtle change in men's mind, or that the passion, because of which so many countries were given to the sword, did not begin in the mind of some shepherd boy lighting up his eyes for a moment before it ran upon its way. William Butler Yeats. There is no fiction. Imagining fulfills itself in what our lives become. And now I have told you before it takes place, so that when it does take place, you may believe. The Greeks were right. The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men, but they have fallen asleep and do not realize the might they wield by their imaginal activities. Real are the dreams of gods, and smoothly pass their pleasure in a long immortal dream. E.B., an author, is fully aware that today's fiction can become tomorrow's fact. In this letter, she writes, "One spring, I completed a novelette, sold it, and forgot about it. Not until many long months later did I sit down and nervously compare some facts in my fiction with some facts in my life. Please read a brief outline of my created story, then compare it with my personal experience. The heroine of my story took a vacation trip to Vermont, to the small city of Stowe, Vermont, to be exact. When she reached her destination, she was faced with such unpleasant behavior on the part of her companion that she had to continue her lifetime pattern of allowing another selfish demand dominate her or break that pattern and leave. She broke it and returned to New York. When she returned, and the story continues, events took shape in a proposal of marriage which she happily accepted. For my part of this tale, as small events evolved, I began to remember the dictates of my own pen and insignificant relationship. This is what happened to me. I received an invitation from a friend offering me a vacation at her summer place in Vermont. I accepted and was not startled at first when I learned her summer place was in the city of Stowe. When I arrived, I found my hostess in such a highly nervous state, I realized I was faced with either a wretched summer or the choice of walking out on her. Never before in my life had I been strong enough to ignore what I thought were the claims of duty and friendship. But this time I did, and without ceremony returned to New York. A few days after I returned to my home, I too received the proposal of marriage. But at this point, fact and fiction parted. I refused the offer. I know, Neville, there is no such thing as fiction. E.B. Forgetful is green earth. The gods alone remember everlastingly. By their great memories, the gods are known. Ends run true to their imaginal origins. We reap the fruit of forgotten blossom time. In life, the events do not come up always where we have strewn the seed, so that we may not recognize our own harvest. Events are the emergence of a hidden imaginal activity. Man is free to imagine whatever he desires. This is why, despite all fatalist and misguided prophets of doom, all awakened men know that they are free. They know that they are creating reality. Is there a scriptural passage to support this claim? Yes. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. W.B. Yeats must have discovered that there is no fiction. For after describing some of his experiences in the conscious use of imagination, he writes, if all who have described events like this have not dreamed, we should rewrite our histories for all men. Certainly all imaginative men must be forever casting forth enchantments, glamours, illusions, and all men, especially tranquil men who have no powerful egotistic life, must be continually passing under their power. Our most elaborate thoughts, elaborate purposes, precise emotions are often, as I think, not really ours, but have a sudden come up, as it were, out of hell or down out of heaven. There is no fiction. Imagine better than the best you know. That's what's happening there in chapter 4. Let's look now to chapter 5, subtle threads. All you behold, though it appears without, it is within, in your imagination, of which this world of mortality is but a shadow. William Blake. Nothing appears or continues in being by a power of its own. Events happen because comparatively stable imaginal activities created them, and they continue in being by virtue of the support they receive from such imaginal activities. The part which imagining the wish fulfilled plays is consciously creating circumstances is obvious in this series of stories. You will see how the telling of one story of the successful use of imagination can serve as a spur and a challenge to others to try it and see. One night, a gentleman rose in my audience. He said that he had no question to ask, but would like to tell me something. This was his story. When he came out of the armed forces after World War II, he got a job that gave him take-home pay of $25 a week. After 10 years, he was making $600 a month. At that time, he bought my book, Awakened Imagination, and read the chapter, The Pruning Shears of Revision. Through the daily practice of revision, as set forth there, he was able to tell my audience 2 years later that his income was equal to that of the President of the United States. In my audience sat a man who, by his confession, was broke. He had read the same book, But he suddenly realized he had done nothing with the use of his imagination to solve his financial problem. He decided he would try to imagine himself as the winner of the 5-10 pool at Caliente Racetrack. In his words, in this pool, one attempts to pick winners in the 5th through the 10th races. So this is what I did. In my imagination, I stood, sorting my tickets, and feeling as I did so that I had each of the 6 winners. I enacted this scene over and over in my imagination until I actually felt goose pimples. Then I saw the cashier giving me a large sum of money, which I placed beneath my imaginary shirt. This was my entire imaginal drama. And for 3 weeks, night after night, I enacted this scene and fell asleep in the action. After 3 weeks, I traveled physically to the Caliente racetrack. And on that day, every detail of my imaginative play was actually realized. The only change in the scene was that the cashier gave me a check for a total of $84,000 instead of currency. TK. After my lecture, the night this story was told, a man in the audience asked me if I thought it possible for him to duplicate TK's experience. I told him he must decide the circumstances of his imaginal scene himself, but that whatever scene he chose, he must create a drama he could make natural to himself and imagine the end intently with all the feeling he could muster. He must not labor for the means to the end, but live imaginatively in the feeling of the wish fulfilled. 1 month later, he showed me a check for $16,000, which he had won in another 5-10 pool at the same Caliente racetrack the previous day. This man had a sequel to his most interesting duplication of TK's good fortune. His first win took care of his immediate financial difficulties, although he wanted more money for future family security. Also, and more important to him, he wanted to prove that this had not been an accident. He reasoned that if his good luck could happen a second time in succession, the so-called law of percentages would give way to proof for him that his imaginal structures were actually producing this miraculous reality. And so he dared to put his imagination to a second test. He continues, I wanted a sizable bank account, and this to me meant seeing a large balance in my bank statements. Therefore, in my imagination, I enacted a scene which took me into 2 banks. In each bank, I would see an appreciative smile meant for me from the bank manager as I walked into his establishment, and I would hear the teller's cordial greeting. I would ask to see my statement. In one bank, I saw a balance of $10,000. In the other bank, I saw a balance of $15,000. My imaginal scene did not end there. Immediately after seeing my bank balances, I would turn my attention to my horse racing system, which through a progression of 10 steps would bring my winnings to $11,533 with a starting capital of $200. I would divide the winnings into 12 piles on my desk. Counting the money in my imaginary hands, I would put 1,000 in each of 11 piles and the remaining $533 in the last pile. My imaginative accounting would amount to $36,533, including my bank balances. I enacted this entire imaginative scene each morning, afternoon, and night for less than 1 month, and on March the 2nd, I went to the Caliente track again. I made out my tickets, but strangely enough, and not knowing why I did so, I duplicated 6 more tickets exactly like the 6 already made out, but in the 10th selection. I made a mistake and copied 2 tickets twice. As the winners came in, I held 2 of them, each paying $16,423.50. I also had 6 consolation tickets, each paying $656.80. The combined total amounted to $36,788. My imaginary accounting 1 month before had totaled 36,533. 2 points of interest, most profound to me, were that by seeing accident, I had marked 2 winning tickets identically, and also that at the end of the ninth race, which was one of the major winners, the trainer attempted to scratch the horse, but the stewards denied the trainer's request. AJF. How subtle were the threads that led to his goal? Results must testify to our imagining, or we really are not imagining the end at all. AJF faithfully imagined the end, and all things conspired to aid his harvesting. His mistake in copying a winning ticket twice and the steward's refusal to allow the trainer's request were events created by the imaginal drama to move the plan of things forward to its goal. Chance, wrote Belfort Bax, may be defined as that element in the reality change, that is, in the flowing synthesis of events, which is incredulous to law or the causal category. To live wisely, we must be aware of our imaginal activities, or at any rate of the end which they are tending. We must see to it that it is the end we desire. Wise imagining identifies itself only with such activities that are of value or promise well. Wise imagining identifies itself only with such activities that are of value or promise well. However much man seems to be dealing with a material world, he is actually living in a world of imagination. When he discovers that it is not the physical world of facts, but imaginal activities which shape his life, then the physical world will no longer be the reality, and the world of imagination no longer the dream. Does the road wind uphill all the way? Yes, to the very end. Will the day's journey take the whole long day? From morn to night, my friend. Chapter 6. Visionary Fancy. The nature of visionary fancy or imagination is very little known, and the external nature and permanence of its ever existent images is considered as less permanent than the things of vegetative and generative nature. Yet the oak dies as well as the lettuce, but its eternal image and individuality never dies, but renews by its seed. Just so the imaginative image returns by the seed of contemplative thought. William Blake. The images of our imagination are the realities of which any physical manifestation is only the shadow. If we are faithful to vision, the image will create for itself the only physical manifestation of itself it has a right to make. We speak of the reality of a thing when we mean its material substance. That is exactly what an imaginist means by its unreality or shadow. Imagining is spiritual sensation. Enter into the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Through spiritual sensation, through your use of imaginal sight, sound, scent, taste, and touch, you will give to your image the sensory vividness necessary to produce that image in your outer or shadow world. Here is the story of one who was faithful to his vision. F.B., being a true imaginist, remembered what he had heard in his imagination. Thus he writes, A friend who knows my passionate fondness for opera tried to get Kirsten Flagstaff's complete recording of Tristan and Isolde for me at Christmas. In over a dozen record stores, he was told the same thing. RCA Victor is not reissuing this recording, and there have been no copies available since June 1st. On December 27th, I determined to prove your principle again by getting the album I desired so intensely. Lying down in my living room, I mentally walked into a record shop I patronize and asked the one salesman whose face and voice I could recall, "Do you have Flagstaff's Complete Isolde?" He replied, "Yes, I have." That ended the scene, and I repeated it until it was real to me. Late that afternoon, I went to that record shop to physically enact the scene. Not one detail supplied by the senses had encouraged me to believe I could walk out of that shop with those records. I had been told last September by the same salesman in the same shop the same story my friend had received there before Christmas. Approaching the salesman I had seen in imagination that morning, I said, "Do you have Flagstaff's Complete Isolde?" He replied, "No, we haven't." Without saying anything audible to him, I said inwardly, "That's not what I heard you say." As I turned to leave the shop, I noticed on a top shelf what I thought to be an advertisement of this set of records and remarked to the salesman, "If you don't have the merchandise, you shouldn't advertise it." "Well, that's right," he replied, and as he reached up to take it down, discovered it to be a complete album with all 5 records. The scene wasn't played exactly as I had constructed it, but the result confirmed what my imagined scene implied. How can I thank you, FB? After reading FB's letter, we must agree with Anthony Eden that an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. FB's fancy, fusing with the sense field of the record shop, enriched aspects of it and made them his, what he perceived. Our future is our imagining in its creative march. FB used his imagination for a conscious purpose, representing life as he desired it to be, and thereby affecting life instead of merely reflecting it. So sure was he that his imaginal drama was the reality and the physical act but a shadow, that when the salesman says, "No, we haven't," FB mentally said, "That's not what I heard you say." He not only remembered what he had heard, but he was still remembering it. Imagining the wish fulfilled is the seeking that finds, the asking that receives, the knocking to which is opened. He saw and heard what he desired to see and hear, and would not take "No, we haven't" for an answer. The imaginist dreams while awake. Imaginative like a joyless eye that finds no object worth its constancy. Mrs. GR2 had imaginatively heard what she wanted to physically hear and knew the outer world must conform it. This is her story. Some time ago, we advertised our home for sale, which was necessary for us to buy a larger property on which we had placed a deposit. Several people would have brought our home immediately, but we were obliged to explain that we could not close any deal until we learned whether or not our offer for the property we wanted had been accepted. At this time, a broker called and literally begged us to allow him to show our home to a client of his who was eager for this location and would be glad to pay even more than we were asking. We explained our situation to the broker and to his client. They both stated they did not mind waiting for our deal to be consummated. The broker asked us to sign a paper which he said was not binding in any way, but would give him first chance at the sale if our other deal went through. Oh no, I did. I am still here though. Maybe it'll click out again. Yes, Sugar Visions, it will come back. The broker asked us to sign a paper which he said was not binding in any way, but would give him first chance at the sale of our other deal if our other deal went through. We signed the paper and later learned that in California real estate law, nothing could have been more binding. A few days later, our deal for the new property fell through. So we notified this broker, and his verbal response was, well, just forget it. 2 weeks later, he filed suit against us for $1,500 commission. Trial date was set, and we asked for a jury trial. Our attorney assured us he would do all he could, but the law on this particular point was so stringent that he could not see any possibility of our winning the case. Then time for the trial arrived. My husband was in the hospital and could not appear with me in our defense. I had no witnesses, but the broker brought 3 attorneys and a number of witnesses into court against us. Our attorney now told me we had not the slightest chance to win. I turned to my imagination, and this is what I did. Completely disregarding all that had been said by attorneys, witnesses, and the judge who seemed to favor the plaintiff, I thought only of the words I wanted to hear. In my imagination, I listened intently and heard the foreman of the jury say, "We find the defendant not guilty." I listened until I knew it was true. I closed my mind's ear to everything said in that courtroom and heard only those words. "We find the defendant not guilty." The jury deliberated from noon recess until 4:30 that afternoon, and all during those hours I sat in that courtroom and heard those words over and over in my imagination. When the jurors returned, the judge asked the foreman to stand and give their verdict. The foreman stood up and said, "We find the defendant not guilty. Mrs. G.R., if there were dreams to sell, what would you buy? Would you not buy your wish fulfilled? Your dreams are without price and without money." By locking up the jury in her imagination, hearing only what she wanted to hear, she called the jury to unanimity on her behalf. Imagining being the reality of all that exists, with it the lady achieved her wish fulfilled. Hebel's statement that the poet creates from contemplation is true of Imaginists as well. They know how to utilize their video audio hallucinations to create reality. Nothing is so fatal as conformity. We must not allow ourselves to be girt about by the ring fixity of fact. So don't allow yourself to be moved about by the ringed fixity of fact. Change the image and thereby change the fact. R.O. employed the art of seeing and feeling to create her vision in imagination. Here is her story. A year ago, I took my children to Europe, leaving my furnished apartment in the care of my maid. When we returned a few months later to the United States, I found my maid and all my furniture gone. The apartment superintendent stated that the maid had had my furniture moved by my request. There was nothing I could do at the moment. So I took my children and moved into a hotel. I, of course, reported the incident to the police and also brought in private detectives on the case. Both organizations investigated every moving company and every storage warehouse in New York City, but to no avail. There seemed to be absolutely no trace of my furniture nor of my maid. Having exhausted all outside resources, I remembered your teaching and decided I would try using my imagination in this matter. So while seated in my hotel room, I closed my eyes and imagined myself in my own apartment, sitting in my favorite chair and surrounded by all my personal furnishings. I looked across the living room at the piano on which I kept pictures of my children. I would continue to stare at my piano until the entire room became vividly real to me. I could see my children's pictures and actually feel the upholstery of the chair in which, in my imagination, I sat. The next day, as I came out of my bank, I turned to walk in the direction of my vacant apartment instead of toward my hotel. When I reached the corner, I discovered my mistake and was just about to turn back when my attention was drawn to a very familiar pair of ankles. Yes, the ankles belonged to my maid. I walked up to her and took hold of her arm. Well, she was quite frightened, but I assured her all I wanted from her was my furniture. I called a taxi, and she took me to the place in which her friends had stored my furnishings. In one day, my imagination had found what an entire big city police force and private investigators could not find in weeks. R.O. This lady knew of the secret of imagining before she called in the police. But imagining, in spite of its importance, was forgotten owing to attention being fixed on facts. However, what reason failed to find by force? Imagining found without effort. What reason failed to find by force? Imagining found without effort. Nothing merely goes on, including the sense of loss, without its imaginal support. By imagining that she was seated in her own chair, in her own living room, surrounded by all of her own furnishings, she withdrew the imaginal support she had given to her sense of loss. And by this imaginal change, she recovered her lost furniture and re-established her home. Your imagination is most creative when you imagine things as you desire them to be, building a new experience out of a dream of fancy. To build such a dream of fancy in her imagination, FG brought to play all of her senses: sight, sound, touch, smell, even taste. This is her story. Since childhood, I have dreamed of visiting faraway places. The West Indies, particularly, fired my fancy, and I would revel in the feeling of actually being there. Dreams are wonderfully inexpensive, and as an adult, I continued to dream my dreams, for I had no money or time to make them come true. Last year, I was taken to the hospital in need of surgery. I had heard your teaching, and while recuperating, had decided to intensify my favorite daydream while I had time on my hands. I actually wrote to the Alcoa steamship line asking for free travel folders and pored over them hour after hour, choosing the ship and the stateroom and the 7 ports I desired most to see. I would close my eyes and in my imagination would walk up the gangplank of that ship and feel the movement of water as the great liner pushed its way into free ocean. I heard the thud of waves breaking against the sides of the ship, felt the steaming warmth of a tropical sun on my face, and smelled and tasted salt in the air as we all sailed through blue waters. For one solid week, confined to a hospital bed, I lifted the free and happy experience of actually being on that ship. I lived the free and happy experience of actually being on that ship. Then, the day before my release from the hospital, I tucked the colored folders away and forgot them. 2 months later, I received the telegram from an advertising agency telling me I had won a contest. I remembered having deposited a contest coupon some months before in a neighborhood supermarket, but had completely forgotten the act. I had won first prize, and wonder of wonders, it entitled me to a Caribbean cruise sponsored by the Alcoa Steamship Line. But the wonder didn't stop there. The very stateroom I had imaginatively lived in and moved about in while confined to a hospital bed had been assigned to me. And to make an unbelievable story even more unbelievable, I sailed on the ship I had chosen, which stopped in not one, but all of the 7 ports I had desired to visit. FG. To travel is the privilege not of the rich, but of the imaginative. There concludes chapter 6. Listen, let's do chapter 7. It is called Moods. Brace yourselves. If you have to go, catch the replay. Chapter 7. Moods. Moods. This is an age in which the mood decides the fortune of people rather than the fortunes decide the mood. Sir Winston Churchill. Men regard their moods far too much as effects and not sufficiently as causes. Moods are imaginal activities without which no creation is possible. We say that we are happy because we have achieved our goal. We do not realize that the process works equally well in the reverse direction, that we shall achieve our goal because we have assumed the happy feeling of the wish fulfilled. Moods are not only the result of the conditions of our life, they are also the causes of those conditions. In The Psychology of Emotions, Professor Ribot writes, an idea which is only an idea produces nothing and does nothing. It only acts if it is felt, if it is accompanied by an effective state, if it awakens tendencies, that is to say, motor elements. The lady in the following story so successfully felt the feeling of her wish fulfilled, she made her mood the character of the night, frozen in a delightful dream. Most of us read and love fairy stories, but we all know that stories of improbable riches and good fortune are for the delight of the very young. But are they? I want to tell you of something unbelievably wonderful that happened to me through the power of my imagination. And I am not young in years. We live in an age which believes in neither fable nor magic, and yet everything I could possibly want in my wildest daydreams was given to me by the simple use of what you teach. That imagining creates reality, and that feeling is the secret of imagining. At the time this wonderful thing happened to me, I was out of a job and had no family to fall back upon for support. I needed just about everything. To find a decent job, I needed a car to look for it. And though I had a car, it was so worn out it was ready to fall apart. I was behind in my rent. I had no proper clothes to seek a job, and today it's no fun for a woman of 55 to apply for a job of any kind. My bank account was almost depleted, and there was no friend to whom I could turn. But I had been attending your lectures for almost a year, and my desperation forced me to put my imagination to the test. My desperation forced me to put my imagination to the test. Indeed, I had nothing to lose. It was natural for me, I suppose, to begin by imagining myself having everything I needed. But I needed so many things, and in such a short order, that I found myself exhausted when I finally got through the list. And by that time, I was so nervous I could not sleep. One lecture night, I heard you tell of an artist who captured the feeling, or word as you called it, of "Isn't it wonderful?" in his personal experience. I began to apply this idea to my case. Instead of thinking of and imagining every article I needed, I tried to capture the feeling that something wonderful was happening to me, not tomorrow, not next week, but right now. I would say over and over to myself as I fell asleep, "Isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening to me now." And I fell asleep. I would feel the way I would expect to feel under such circumstances. I repeated that imaginary action and feeling for 2 months, night after night. And one day in early October, I met a casual friend I hadn't seen for months, who informed me he was about to leave on a trip to New York. I had lived in New York many years ago, and we talked of the city a few moments and then parted. I completely forgot the incident. 1 month later to the day, this man called at my apartment and simply handed me a certified check in my name for $2,500. Well, after I got over the initial shock of seeing my name on a check for so much money, the story that unfolded seemed to me like a dream. It concerned a friend I had not seen nor heard from in more than 25 years. This friend of my past, I now learned, had become extremely wealthy in those 25 years. Our mutual acquaintance, who had brought the check to me, had met him quite by accident during the trip to New York last month. During their conversation, they spoke of me, and for reasons I was not to know, for to this day I have not heard from him personally and have never attempted to contact him, this old friend decided to share a portion of his great wealth with me. For the next 2 years, from the office of his attorney, I received monthly checks so generous in amount, they not only covered every necessary requirement of daily living, but left much over for all the lovely things of life: a car, clothes, a spacious apartment, and best of all, no need to earn my daily bread. This month I received a letter and some legal papers to be signed, which provided the continuation of this monthly income for the rest of my natural life. TK. If the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. Sir Winston calls on us to act on the assumption that we already possess that which we sought to assume a virtue if we have it not. We must assume that we already possess that which we sought to assume a virtue if we have it not. Is this not the secret of miracles? Thus the man with palsy was told to rise, to take up his bed and walk, to mentally act as if he were healed. And when the actions of his imagination corresponded with the actions which he would physically perform, were he healed, he was healed. This is a story about which some may say, it would have happened anyway, but those who read it carefully will find room to wonder. It begins 1 year ago, as I left Los Angeles to visit my daughter in San Francisco. Instead of the happy-natured individual she had always been, I found her in deep distress. Not knowing the cause of her anguish, and not wishing to ask, I waited until she told me that she was in great financial trouble and must have $3,000 immediately. I am not a poor woman, but I didn't have much cash I could put my hands on that quickly. Knowing my daughter, I knew she would not have accepted it anyway. I offered to borrow the money for her, but she refused, and instead asked me to help her in my way. She meant using my imagination, for I had often told her of your teaching, and some of my words must have struck home. I immediately agreed on this plan with the provision that she would help me help her. We decided on an imaginal scene we could both practice that involved seeing money come to her from everywhere. We felt money was flooding toward her from every corner until she was in the middle of a sea of money. But we did this always with the feeling of joy for anyone concerned, and we had no thought of means, only happiness for all. The idea seemed to catch fire with her, and I know she was responsible for what happened a few days later. She was certainly transformed back to the happy, confident mood that was natural to her, though there was no evidence of any real money coming in at the time. I left to return home in the East. When I arrived home, I called my mother, a lovely young lady of 91, who immediately asked me to come and see her. I wanted a day's rest, but she couldn't wait. It had to be now. Of course, I went, and after greeting me, she handed me a check for $3,000 made out to my daughter. Before I could speak, she handed me three additional checks totaling $1,500 made in favor of my daughter's children. Her reason? She explained that she had suddenly decided the day before to give what she had in cash to those she loved while she was still here to know of their happiness in receiving it. Well, it would have happened anyway. No, not like this. Not within days of my daughter's frantic need, and then her sudden transformation to a mood of joy. I know that her imaginal act caused this wonderful change, bringing not only great joy to the receiver, but to the giver as well. P.S. I almost forgot to add that among the checks so lavishly given was one for me, too, for $3,000. M.B. The boundless opportunities opened by recognizing the shift of the focus of imagining is beyond measure. There are no boundaries. The drama of life is an imaginal activity in which we bring to pass by our moods rather than by our physical acts. Moods so ably guide all towards that which they affirm. They may be said to create the circumstances of life and dictate the events. The mood of the wish fulfilled is the high tide which lifts us easily off the bar of the senses where we usually lie stranded. If we are aware of the mood and know this secret of imagining, we may announce that all that our mood affirms will come to pass. The following story is by a mother who succeeded in sustaining a seemingly playful mood with startling results. Surely you've heard the old wives' tale about warts. That if a wart is bought, it will disappear. I've known this story from childhood, but not until I heard your lectures did I realize the truth hidden in the old tale. My boy, a lad of 10, had many large, ugly warts on his legs, causing an irritation which had plagued him for years. I decided that my sudden insight could be used to his advantage. A boy has a lot of faith in his mother as a rule. So I asked him if he would like to be rid of his warts. Well, he quickly said, yes, but he did not want to go to the doctor. I asked him to play a little game with me, that I would pay him a sum of money for each wart. Well, this suited him fine, he said. He didn't see how he could lose. We arrived at a fair price, he thought. And then I said, now, I'm paying you good money for those warts. They no longer belong to you. You never keep property belonging to someone else, so you can no longer keep those warts. They will disappear. It may take a day, 2 days, or a month, but remember that I've bought them and they belong to me. My son was delighted with our game, and the results sound like something read in old musty books on magic. But believe me, within 10 days the warts began to fade. And at the end of 1 month, every wart on his body had completely disappeared. There is a sequel to this story, for I've bought warts from many people. They too thought it great fun and accepted my 5, 7, or 10 cents a wart. In each case, the wart disappeared. But really, only one person believes me when I tell him his imagination alone took away the warts. That one person is my young son, J.R. Man, imagining himself into a mood, takes on himself the results of the mood. If he does not imagine himself into the mood, he is ever free of the result. Come again? If he does not imagine himself into the mood, he is ever free of the result. The great Irish mystic A.E. wrote in The Candle of Vision, I became aware of a swift echo or response to my own moods in circumstance, which have seemed hitherto immutable in its indifference. I could prophesy from the uprising of new moods in myself that I, without search, would soon meet people of a certain character, and so I met them. Each inanimate thing, even inanimate things, were under the sway of these affinities. But man need not wait for the uprising of new moods in himself. He can create happy moods at will. And there concludes our reading for tonight. Oh, we will continue with chapter 8 tomorrow through the looking glass. I trust that tonight you have been stirred up to catch a mood. You have the capability to stir up a mood at will. Persist in that mood. Persist in that mood, and you will bring about its physical effect. Is what we've heard from story after story after story tonight. So remember that woman who said, out of my desperation, I had to try it out. So you see, you don't even have to be desperate. You just have to be curious. Is this really going to work? If I, in my imagination, put my head on my pillow and I say, ooh, isn't it wonderful? It is done. My thing that I have been creating is fulfilled. And you can't tell me the man in the record store did not take no for an answer. The woman in the courtroom, what did she hear? We find the defendant not guilty is what she heard. She heard what she wanted to hear, and she did not deviate from it. So I trust tonight, my beautiful friends, that every single story you have heard has aroused your mood and your curiosity so that you will practice to catch the mood of your desire fulfilled. You notice it matters not. It could be the warts on his legs. Come on now. It could be a job. It could be anything. It is done. And don't you dare waver. So what are you practicing in your mental faculties? You're practicing staying focused in the mood that it is done. I dare you. I'm not just daring you, I'm daring myself. It's time now that we grow beyond just the little things. There's no reason to fear. That's tomorrow's lesson, by the way. Yes, that's tomorrow's lesson. So tonight, my beautiful friends, as you rest on your pillow, rest with that sensation of joy in your belly and have it bubble up until your cheeks lift in a curvature of a smile and you say, oh, it is done. I had one of those happen today. Oh, yes, I did. I did. She messaged me and she said, Angela, I don't know what to do. The strike is still going on. I'm getting unemployment, but they've somehow delayed it and rent is due, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I got that message at 12:01. I responded and I said, what is your desired outcome? Turn your attention towards it being so. And I said, all is well. And as I was typing that out, I heard in my head, oh my God, Angela, oh my God, it's done. I don't even know how it happened. Oh, that's exactly now 12:53. I get a copy of the email telling me what? Your funds have been released. They will hit your account in 48 hours. Do you understand she's been trying to fix this since August of this year? And only in a matter of 50 minutes. Teamwork. I heard what I wanted to hear. And I said to her, but girl, you did the work. She goes, I felt like giving up and you coached me through. And I was like, come on, man. You got to take credit for your work. So tonight, when you put your head on that pillow, there is nothing too big. There's nothing too small. But that is all a matter of perception. But I allude to tomorrow's lesson. Fall asleep in that mood of I can do all things. Everything is possible to you. I trust that you are as inspired and wound and fired up as much as I am. I love you all. Rest well tonight, my beautiful friends. Rest well. YouTube, I see you. Sugar Visions. Miss M. Shea Butter. And for the others who've not made yourselves known, I see you. Miss Cherry, I see you. Miss Deborah, I see you. My Melanin Marquise. I see you too.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You are most welcome. So rest well, my beautiful friends. Rest well.